This week, shit gets deep. We get to experience and process some really deep emotions, but the good news is our villain origin story starts this week. And that's because we have quite a few highlights this week. Number one, we're going to have Venus making a trine to Mars while Venus is in Scorpio and Mars is in Cancer. Mercury makes a trine to Jupiter. I'm loving that transit. Jupiter stations retrograde this week. We have Pluto stationing direct this week. Then by the end of the week on Sunday, we are going to be having Mercury make a square to Pluto before Mercury enters Scorpio. Then we're going to be having the Sun make a trine to Jupiter and the Sun square Mars at the same time. That's quite a bit to go over, so let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, I'm a professional astrologer. Been doing this for almost a decade, and I have literally almost 1,000 videos now on astrology. So if you'd like to keep up to date with what's going on in the universe, go ahead and follow me for more. This week, we are talking about October 7th through October 13th of 2024. So we start Monday off with just the moon in Sagittarius making a square to Saturn. And the only note I wrote down here is like, you're not going anywhere. It reminds me of do not pass go, do not collect $200. The moon in Sag is feeling a little bit more freedom, a little bit more fun after Sunday's kind of intense emotional day. But with that moon in Sag squaring Saturn and Pisces, there's a vibe of like, hey, you can run, but you can't hide. Or, wherever you go, there you are. And so what I think is really important about Monday is being able to be optimistic, being able to see, again, what solutions are, having hope and faith, but just knowing that running away isn't the solution. Trying to avoid your issues isn't the solution. Have some optimism here. But I think the other part of it too is because it's squaring Saturn and Pisces. Saturn and Pisces can be very cold. It can be very harsh. And we can be like, again, struggling with a lot of internal battles. The moon in Sag is just trying to say like, hey, have a little fun, soften this up a little bit. You can progress in life and you can do all the things that you want to do and you can have a fun time doing it. You don't have to make it this hard, tumultuous energy that just absolutely grinds you up and spits you out. You can have a little bit of fun in the process. So on Monday, there is a little bit of a saying no, there is a little bit of a boundary, there is a little bit of resistance, a little bit of a delay with things. However, try to be optimistic, try to have fun with it. Similar to how you would handle traffic. If you're on your way to something and you hit traffic, you being upset and angry is not going to get you there any faster. But if you listen to the radio or listen to your favorite song, that might make the time fly by as well, be more enjoyable. And then we get to Tuesday, and our two highlights on Tuesday is going to be Venus and Scorpio making a trine to Mars in Cancer. I really love this transit, although I find it really funny. We have Mercury making a trine to Jupiter as well as a highlight. I'm loving this transit, and I think the combination of the two is really interesting. And the moon will still be in Sagittarius. It'll be making an opposition to Jupiter, and then it will be making a sextile to Mercury. So this is really interesting. I have a meme for Venus trine Mars. This is my meme for Venus trine Mars. If you're like a Gen Z millennial, you know this picture. But why this is so funny to me is I look at Venus trine Mars as like a fallen lover's kind of dynamic. Venus is all about pleasure and fun, but she's in detriment in Scorpio, right? Like she is without access to the resources that she needs in order to do the job that she wants to do. Mars is about, fights and conflicts and energy and drive. You can also sit here and say, desire, I kind of go back and forth with if Venus or Mars is desire, but maybe they have they can both relate to that. But Mars is fallen. Mars is without resources. Mars is in Cancer. And this reminds me of you ever see tweakers out in the street that have a better loving relationship than you and whoever the hell you're dating? It's like they're actually ride or dies. Like they actually got each other's back, even though they live in a tent and, do whippets all day long. But that's why I relate to this photo because this photo is so funny to me. That's how I think of the Venus Mars trine. But the other way I look at this too is the reason I titled this week as really deep emotions is because of this transit. The thing is with Mars and Cancer and Venus, Mars and Venus are very personal planets to us, right? And they're both not doing that good. The sun is fallen at this point. Jupiter is fallen at this point. And when I say fallen, I also mean detriment at the same time. Technically the sun is fallen, but Jupiter is in detriment. Either way, they're debilitated. And so what I find really interesting about this month is most of the planets are debilitated. They are without dignity. They do not have the resources that they need. So there's a really low energy to this month. But what I like about this month is that Venus and Mars and Saturn are all making these trines. They're all making these really powerful connections. And the way I look at it is you've got to feel stuff. I think this winter gets really intense. And I think this winter is going to be challenging. I think as we get into next year, things are going to get much better, but they're also going to be very intense, as in there's nothing but major change. But this winter is more so of a struggle, an internal struggle, because you have to think of what the water signs, relate to. They relate to our emotions and the way that we feel in the internal parts of ourselves. But Venus being fun and desire and connection, and Mars, which is our energy and drive, they're making this really tight connection. They're making this trine where they are in harmony with one another. They are working together, even though the odds are stacked against them. And so there's this level of like, hey, this really sucks, but these are the emotions I need to feel in order to feel supported moving forward. Like, hey, at least you may feel like shit, but you're not alone. That's the vibe that I'm really picking up on with this. And then you add Mercury making a trine to Jupiter as our other highlight. And there is this like optimism. Like Mercury is, again, the way that we communicate, the way that we think. It's in Libra. It's thinking about balance. It's thinking about relationships. And it's trining Jupiter in Gemini. It's like, Jupiter is struggling with faith in Gemini. It's listening a little bit too much to all types of information, but at least Mercury trining Jupiter is like tapping into that information for a resource to think of, again, solutions, to think of a bigger picture, to think of what else can we do. And when you add the moon in Sagittarius, which is still hopeful at this point because the moon in Sagittarius is naturally optimistic, making an opposition to Jupiter and sextiling Mercury, so the moon is going in between these two planets and it's connecting these two planets even further. There's this level of like, again, optimism and clarity that we get on Tuesday mentally, but emotionally we have, again, like this just not feeling good, but again, we feel really supported. It reminds me of like intervention. It reminds me of, you're in a situation that doesn't feel that comfortable, but you are supported in it. And there's people that are around you that love you and that want to help you, even though they have to confront this really shitty thing that's going on in your life right now. But you see the bigger picture. You see the hope. That's what Tuesday is all about. And I want you to really feel it out on Tuesday. I want you to really tap into like, what's important to you? What do you not like? And do you want to feel that emotion anymore? And what are you going to do in your life to like make sure you don't feel that emotion? Or like, how many times do you have to touch the hot stove in order to realize, I don't ever want to touch that hot stove again? That fucking sucks. And then we get to Wednesday. And on Wednesday, the moon will still be in Sagittarius. It's going to make a square to Neptune. And then it will enter Capricorn. Then we also have a highlight, which is Jupiter stationing retrograde. Real vibe shift here. So the first thing I would like to talk about with the moon in Sag squaring Neptune is there's this, again, confusion, loss of hope, because again, the moon in Sag is like very optimistic, but when you start thinking about things, like, it's really easy to be like, oh, well, I could do anything in the world. And then you kind of like, think about it for a minute and it gets overwhelming and you go, well, I don't know how I'm actually going to get there. And that moon squaring Neptune is just like, you might be deceiving yourself a little bit here. You might be a little bit too wrapped up in the vision. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's going to be times where having a vision, being creative, being hopeful is really good. And there's going to be other times where, for example, when the moon in Sag squares Neptune, where you need to clarify that a little bit more. You need to be a little bit more specific and detailed and not just wing it and hope for the best. You might need to have a plan. And I think that moon squaring Neptune is like, damn, how am I actually going to get to my destination? And then the moon goes into Capricorn, where we start developing a plan. We start getting a little bit more serious about it. And I love the moon in Capricorn personally, because oftentimes we're emotional creatures. We are driven by our emotions. But when the moon is in Capricorn, it's much easier to take a step back from them and just do what we have to do without being super emotionally involved. And that's going to be important for the next few days of this week. But we also have Jupiter making a stationing retrograde. Here's the deal. There's a lot to talk about with Jupiter retrograde, to be honest with you. When Jupiter is direct and it moves into a new sign, so Gemini, this has happened since late May, early June. It's been introducing all these new things to your life. It's been expanding an area of your life. And the reason Jupiter expands is it wants you to think deeper about this area. There's a lot of opportunities, but Jupiter's like, hey, here's all this abundance. What's the right one for you? Some of the most powerful people can I think about like Cat Williams. For example, if you're familiar with pop culture, he did that interview with Shannon Sharp, I think. I might be wrong about that. But he was like, I was offered $50 million for, X, Y, and Z. And, I decided to not take it. I think of Jupiter as that, is like, you can get access to abundance and all this stuff, but like, what is the cost? And is that worth it? And for some people, that's worth it. I'm not saying the whole Diddy thing was essentially worth it, but what I'm saying is that there are opportunities that can be presented to you that may or may not be worth it. And that's what Jupiter is about. It's asking like, what's actually your belief about this area of your life? What do you actually want out of this? And, is it just the money? Is it just the abundance? Or is there like a deeper morality to it that you appreciate more? And so Jupiter going to Gemini is introducing all of these things. Here's all these new things, but it's in Gemini, right? It's in detriment. It's like, here's this information. Here's this data. Here's you thinking logically and not spiritually, if that makes sense. As Jupiter goes retrograde, this is now bringing things internal. Like Jupiter being direct is, here's all of this stuff. Learn this, learn that. What do you believe? Jupiter going retrograde is like, okay, you have all the noise around you. You have all of the information. Now, what are you doing with that information? I genuinely think Jupiter and Gemini will be better as Jupiter is retrograde, because Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. It's expanding in a house, Gemini, that's ruled by Mercury, the tiniest planet. Jupiter retrograde is consolidating this information. It's saying, okay, what is the information that's going to work for me and what is the information that's not going to work for me? And as it goes retrograde, I think it's going to be easier to not listen to so many things. Like I said this before, maybe a couple weeks ago, but Jupiter and Gemini, I'm just overwhelmed with listening to people. I'm just overwhelmed with all the information. I'm just starting to tune out. And I think Jupiter retrograde is going to be really, really good for that. And essentially, you know everything that you need to know. The question is, do you believe it? Can you trust it? You can read the manual and the instructions as much as you want, but until you actually apply it, you really don't know anything. And so then we get to Thursday. Thursday's weird because we have the moon in Capricorn. It's going to make a sextile to Saturn. Then it's going to go opposite Mars. Then it's going to sextile Venus while she's in Scorpio. I find this really interesting because it reminds me of customer service. If you are like an HR person or a boss, the feeling of Thursday is firing someone that you've really wanted to fire, but you cannot show your emotion of excitement about it. The moon in Capricorn sextiling Saturn is, trying to be serious, trying to be focused, but the moon in Capricorn is opposite Mars in Cancer. So the moon in Capricorn, it reminds me of, have you ever seen parents that just cannot, like they're just so used to their child misbehaving that they just tune out? It's really annoying. And if you're one of those parents, please step up. And if you're like, Cameron, oh my God, you're not a parent, you don't understand. Well, the way I was raised, I never acted that way for a reason. But anyway, I look at the moon in Capricorn opposite Mars in Cancer is like a drained parent, not even giving a shit how rambunctious their child is. However, the other way I look at it is Mars is, again, fights and conflicts. It's in Cancer. It's really emotional, right? It's really reactive. And the moon in Capricorn is the opposite of that, right? It's like dead, cold, serious. There's a confrontation that's happening here. And the way you have to kind of look at it is like, I have to address something that's really rambunctious and I don't even have the energy or the time for it. And then after the moon goes opposite Mars, it sextiles Venus. And like the way I look at this is like, you're going to serve it cold. There's something about Thursday about serving energy in a very cold way. And it's going to feel good. Like, have you ever just been like, I can't even think of an example off the top of my head, but just being able to like confront a problematic thing with just deadpan, with just absolutely serious about it, no reaction, no emotion. And then afterwards, after you handled it like a fucking boss, you're just, and you're still not reactive to it. You're still like, whatever, I just had to handle that shit. It does feel a little bit, it does feel a little bit good to like just serve whatever you got to serve cold and serious. That's the energy on Thursday. So the way I want you to really go about it is like, hey, you're probably going to be addressing some problematic things that are really annoying. You just got to handle it. There's no like, oh, you need to think this way about it or feel this way. Like, you just got to be fucking serious, handle that shit, and you're going to feel pretty fucking good about handling it cold. But I also look at it as you may not even be in the space to like serve it any other way but fucking dead ass. And so then we get to Friday. On Friday, the moon, while it's still in Capricorn, is going to make a square to Mercury, and then it's going to trine Uranus. Then the moon sextiles Neptune and conjoins Pluto. So like I said, the moon is going to be making all these aspects to the outer planets before it ingresses into a new sign for a little more while. Then the moon enters Aquarius and then Pluto stations direct. Friday is, again, it's like all outer planet stuff plus the moon. So it's like all this bigger stuff that really doesn't matter day to day, but the moon is involved with all of it. So number one, the moon making a square to Mercury. I just think as the moon's in Capricorn squaring Mercury in Libra, it's one of those things where you might be much more like business oriented, plan oriented, detached from the emotions of it. But the moon making a square to Mercury is not everyone's really on board. So there's going to be this kind of conflict with how we would communicate. Again, the thing is with Mercury and Libra is we're really focused on communicating with other people in like a diplomatic way. But the moon in Capricorn might be like not in tune with its emotions enough to be able to like actually communicate in an empathetic way that Mercury and Libra needs. So like, the problem with the moon in Capricorn squaring Mercury and Libra is like, maybe you just need to open up a little bit more because the Mercury and Libra is going to be like, that's not really nice. That was really cold of you. Why did you say it that way? Moon in Capricorn is just like, well, because fucker, like, you know what I mean? Loosen up a little bit. Otherwise you will kind of see that tension. But then as the moon shines Uranus, there is some sort of a solution. Like, there's a breakthrough moment of like, okay, cool. Well, that got figured out. Then the moon sextiles Neptune and conjoins Pluto. Kind of all over the place. I like it for getting creative and feeling a little bit powerful. But then the moon goes into Aquarius, which is also, again, feeling a little bit more detached, feeling a little bit more airy, a little bit more spacey. But Pluto stations direct. And the biggest thing is like on my memberships on my website, I did my monthly rising sign horoscopes. So if you haven't checked those out yet, go ahead and check out my website. But the biggest thing with Pluto stationing direct is like, long story short, in the grand scheme of things, this is 30 more days of Pluto in Capricorn. It really doesn't fucking matter. But my question for you is like, are you scared or are you going to be bold? Like, what is the story you want to leave this chapter of your life with? Because again, this is why I said it doesn't really matter, because it's like it's been here for like 15, 16 years. It's going to go into Aquarius, and then, lo and behold, this whole energy of whatever Capricorn rules in your chart is different. But are you going to lean more into the fear, or are you going to step a little bit more into a space of empowerment? Are you going to feel bold? Are you going to feel, again, like you can handle it? And a lot of Pluto is like fear-based stuff. Like, are you going to cower in the fear, or are you going to step up to the plate? It's kind of up to you, really. And I would really suggest stepping up to the plate. I would really suggest being bold, because life's going to be a lot fucking easier once you do that. Like, life is really hard when you're scared of everything. And I don't know who needs to hear this. There is literally nothing to be scared about. Like, it is so amazing how often we don't do things because we're afraid, but then the second we actually do it, you're like, oh, it wasn't even that bad. Like, why do we waste so much time being afraid? And I'm questioning this for myself. Like, there's so many things where I'm like, oh, I'm afraid to do this. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, that wasn't bad at all. And then you're like, why did I waste so much of my emotional energy and my attention on fear? Why? I feel like I just wasted my fucking life being afraid. And so don't be afraid. It's a waste of your life. It is an illusion. There's nothing to be afraid about in life. And you might sit here and argue with me about it, but deep down in your heart, I'm fucking right about it. And so then we get to Saturday. The moon is in Aquarius, making a trine to Jupiter. Long story short, I think Saturday is good for socializing, connecting with people. It's a lot of explaining ideas. Like, have you ever had someone that if you're like a nerd like me that likes like history or like politics or whatever, and you kind of discuss things like really deeply, even though like your guys' opinion on the subject doesn't really matter at all. That's like what Saturday is really good for. It is a little bit cold. It is a little bit detached. And that's just like the moon in Aquarius vibe. It's like a little bit more like the moon in Aquarius is like a vibe if you have to get a donated body for science and you have to chop this body up into 1,000 pieces to like study it or whatever. Like, have you ever been to the Bodies exhibit in Las Vegas? I was just talking about this the other day. I'm not too squeamish. I'm not too not a lot of things like affect me, but I could not handle that Bodies thing. Like, I thought I could do it. And then I think it was like the pregnancy section. And it was just like something in me, like it was something very human in me that was just like, I can't see this. Like that was a lot. And I don't react. Like, I could see fucking anything. But that's what like the moon in Aquarius is, like this kind of a detached for the sake of science, for the sake of humanity. We got to do this kind of thing. Not to say that like that's not important to you, or like that doesn't affect you in some way, but there's a level of like detaching from it on a humanitarian level in order to get like the sciencey job part done. But anyway, the moon connecting with Jupiter on Saturday. I just think Saturday is a good day. But then we get to Sunday. We have a fuck ton of shit going on Sunday. Okay, so get this. The moon, while it's in Aquarius, is going to make a square to Venus. Ow. Then it's going to make a square to Uranus. Double ow. Then the Mercury, for our first highlight of the day, is going to make a square to Pluto. And then Mercury enters Scorpio immediately after that. Okay, so those are two highlights. Then the moon, after that happens, enters Pisces and then trines Mercury. Interesting, right? Mercury goes into a water sign, the moon goes into a water sign, they make a trine. And then we have two more highlights, which is the sun makes a trine to Jupiter, and then the sun also squares Mars at the exact same time. Sunday is a lot, to be honest with you. Like, I keep looking at this day as like, I like it and I don't like it so much. So the moon in Aquarius squaring Venus and Scorpio is just not liking people. Like, you ever read one of those really basic horoscopes that are like, Aquarius doesn't like people? This is so that day. Like, moon in Aquarius be like, oh, I hate society. And the moon squares Venus and Scorpio. We're like, everyone's ugly. Like, there's just something like, you just got a fucking chip on your shoulder on Sunday, in my opinion. Like, it's just going to be really easy to be like, everything sucks. I hate people. But then the moon squares Uranus, where it's just kind of like, when have you ever been like negative about something and then karma just kind of slaps you in the face, like similar to like how a Looney Tunes cartoon, like the cat would be walking like Tom and steps on a rake and the rake just smacks him in the face. That's the kind of feeling on Sunday with the moon squaring Venus and then squaring Uranus, where it's like you might be kind of like cynical and kind of like a little bit hurtful, and then I think you're going to be kind of met with like immediate karma. And it's very disruptive. So try to just like at the beginning part of Sunday, just kind of watch how you feel. Try not to be too reactive to things, because I think it's just going to be really easy, and that might be important to fill out, but it's going to be important to not go onto the deep end. So then we have Mercury squaring Pluto. A lot of this is confronting power and corruption. Mercury in Libra, in my opinion, is squaring Pluto, is like trying to battle, let's say, the deep state for a moment, or let's just say any sort of level of bureaucratic corruption through the actual like legal process. There's a high chance it ain't gonna fucking work. You know what I mean? Like, you could be like, we need to stop insider trading with the politicians. I ain't gonna fucking do nothing. but there's a level of needing to confront it and needing to think about it. And I also look at Mercury in Libra squaring Pluto in Capricorn. Now that Pluto is direct, something I think about is like, okay, if Pluto is stationed direct and, our relationship to whatever area of our chart Capricorn rules is kind of extreme at the moment. It's like Pluto at 29 degrees and it's stationing direct. And like, how do we feel about it? I think Mercury in Libra is trying to have a more level-headedness about it. Like, it's not like so much like, oh, your fears are, it's not like, oh, your fears are invalid, like shut up and stop being a bitch. It's more of like, hey, like your fears might be valid, but also there's another perspective where your fears really don't make sense. And I think there's this kind of process of being like, why do I think of it this way? And seeing both sides of the picture when it comes to, again, like your own personal life. So I would really reflect, like, I think Sunday is a good day to really reflect on, like, again, the relationship to power and the relationship to fear, whatever Capricorn rules in your chart, and just thinking about it in a more like, what actually makes more sense? What's actually a little bit more like, I got here in Colorado, election season's coming up and everyone got all pissed off because I'm not voting for the president, but whatever, I'm voting in my local elections. And they give you a book of all the information of what's going on and what to vote for. And I was reading like the arguments for and the arguments against. And the more I kept reading, I was like, damn, there's really good points on both of these for like every single thing, where I was just I have a moon in Libra. So I was like really balancing it out. And so that's the way I like, don't be afraid to look at both sides of the argument here when it comes to whatever Pluto and Capricorn is. But again, I think you're also just going to see that in general. But then Mercury goes into Scorpio. So now this is, again, a little bit more of that villain arc moment coming in, because Mercury is about communication and our thoughts and our ideas. And Scorpio is about the things that are hidden. Scorpio is about the things that you can't see. It's about what's underneath the surface. Because I'm doing my Zodiac course over on my memberships on my website, if you want the most affordable way to learn astrology, I don't know why you're not over there yet, but I keep thinking about Scorpio and stagnant water. And I think about germs and diseases inside of stagnant water and just how like that could even be invisible. That could be hidden in plain sight. And Scorpio too is so, again, like underneath the surface, what you don't always get to really see. And Mercury is now fixated on that for a good and a bad reason. It's like, okay, good, you're looking for hidden intentions. You're looking underneath the surface to see, where people can be foiling you. But the other part of it is you might be a little bit too deep in it. You might be a little bit too fixated in the bad stuff. And that's going to be important to like have a balancing act of. But when the moon goes into Pisces and makes a trine to Mercury, there's like this sensitivity and intuition that pops out. Like, if the moon's in Pisces, we're a lot more sensitive to our surroundings, and Mercury's in Scorpio, right? This is kind of like, have you ever been in, like, let's say like the forest or even just in your home and stopped and been like, something's watching me? Like, that's the vibe of the moon in Pisces trining Mercury. And I think this is a good, I think this is a good energy, meaning as we shift into all this water sign stuff, because now it's going to be, again, Mars in Cancer, Venus in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, Saturn in Pisces. Eventually the sun will go into Scorpio too. We're getting really deep into the emotional stuff. We're getting really deep into the hidden vibe stuff. Like, again, the emotion, like the water signs are really like, how do we feel? And sometimes it takes a little bit of connection to be like, my mind is not connected with my feelings in my body, and I need to make that connection a little bit stronger so I could tap into what I'm feeling. But that moon in Pisces trining Mercury to me is so like, there's something's going on here. Like, I feel something. I'm looking for something. And so with Mercury going into Scorpio, though, I do think that we're looking at a hidden layer. We're going to be fixated, right? Like, think about fixed water. It doesn't want to move. It's not supposed to move. And then it's like, again, there's bad things in it. That's good for getting serious. Why I also used the phrase like villain mode activated this week is Mercury and Scorpio's like, we're not just going to be like Mercury and Libra, where it's like, oh, everything's good in moderation and balance. Mercury and Scorpio's like, no, I'm not good enough. No, I have to do it this way. No, I'm fixated on this. And that's going to be really important to lean into on certain areas of your life. And there's going to be other areas of your life where you're going to realize, okay, maybe I need to pull back out a little bit more. Maybe I need to not be so tunnel vision on something. And so it's your job to have the discrepancy to understand when and where to apply that at. But that's going to be the way that we're communicating, and we're focusing a lot more on hidden intentions, what's underneath the surface, and like, again, our deeper, darker emotions. Now, let's talk about the last two highlights of Sunday. The sun makes a trine to Jupiter and squares Mars at the same time. Now that I'm talking about it, I still have mixed feelings about it. And what I said in the monthly rising sign horoscopes was like, essentially the energy is you are a retail worker and a Karen is freaking out on you over whatever it is. And that's Mars in the superior position to the sun. Mars is in the 10th house from the sun. It is squaring it, is going la, 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 la. But the sun is also trining Jupiter, where it's just kind of like, there's a moment of consciousness. There's this moment of like spiritual evolution when you work in retail, or it doesn't even really matter where you work it, but or a restaurant, for example, when you work in retail, there's this spiritual evolution where like your soul transcends your body. And when you deal with a customer that's like going crazy and you just realize, I don't get paid enough to give a flying fuck about you. And you just deal with it. And the sun trining Jupiter is like, okay, yeah, talk to my manager. That's fine. Write a review. That's fine. Like, I don't care. There's something about the sun shining Jupiter and the sun squaring Mars where it's like something is so in your fucking face that you don't have another choice but to just like not, I don't want to say just, I say not care because Jupiter is again like faith, belief, hope, optimism. It is spiritual and the sun is our willpower and identity. The sun has fallen. Jupiter is in detriment, but they're making this trine to one another. It's like, okay, it sucks to work retail. It sucks to have to deal with a Karen that's yelling at you in front of your face. But there's this level of just like, I'm not letting that affect me. And I mean, again, like when it comes to Karen and just anyone who's like expressing anger towards you seemingly out of nowhere, typically they're not mad at you. They're mad at like, whether it's their husband's cheating on them or, their husband doesn't love them or they were beat as a kid or whatever it is. They're not really actually mad at you, but society has not given anyone actual places to be angry at. Except for a few places. That's why a lot of people hate Trump is because he's the one person a lot of people are allowed to be mad at. But that's besides the point. We don't have places to actually be angry about. So then it ends up becoming super hyper focused on one thing that's a reaction in front of people versus if people actually had a healthy expression of anger, we'd live in a nicer society. But I digress. Mars in Cancer on top of it. It's just like Karen's angry. She's got her own shit and she's throwing it on you. You're not dealing with it though. And again, there's something transcendent about this. And it's one of those things where it's not like, oh, you just wake up and magically feel good. It's like, you're going to be forced into a situation. Like for example, I got my leg tattooed. It's a big S and it's like a lot of black work. It hurt so fucking bad. I've broken so many bones in my body. That hurt. That was up there with some of the worst pain I felt because it's a ton of black right on my shin. I imagine just shin black for like 5 or 6 hours. Through about the halfway point, I got to a point where the more I winced, the more that I like, that hurts, the worse it got. I literally got into deep breathing meditation in order to get through it. And it made it so much better. I shouldn't say I didn't feel the pain, but like comparatively speaking, the pain turned down a lot when I just focused on my breath and I just focused on being in the moment and breathing through the whole thing. And it made the pain way, way easier to deal with. That's how I look at this is like, you're not just waking up and all of a sudden transcending. You're like, holy shit, this really sucks. But again, this is why I use the retail worker analogy. You're just being like, you know what? I don't care, Karen. Like, please yell at me. Like waste more of my time. Like I'm getting paid by the hour. That brings us to next week. Sun will make a square to Mars. Okay. So Sunday, the sun trines Jupiter and squares Mars, but that does also kind of continue on into early Monday morning. We have Venus going opposite Uranus. That's, I've been talking about Venus opposite Uranus for like fucking years now. Venus will make a trine to Neptune. Love that. We have the full moon in Aries that is not an eclipse. And then we have Venus making a sextile to Pluto before Venus goes into Sagittarius. And I'm looking very much forward to Venus and Sagittarius. But that's what I got for you guys this week. Let me know what you are going through in the comments below. I want to hear your guys' stories, what you're excited about, what you're not. Like this video. It generally helps me out. And I'll be seeing you guys next week.